Good afternoon, everyone. Anthony Fasano here from the Engineering Management Institute, and I want to welcome you to today's session, How to Build Expertise and Master Public Speaking. This is part of our joint production with ASME as part of our multi-level career development webinar series. This is our third of 4 sessions in this track. Our fourth session will be a dedicated Q&A session, and I'll give you information on that at the end of the session today. I'm going to jump right in to the topic and start with a quote here. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. The reason I use this quote for this topic is because most engineers and technical professionals that I know believe that speaking in public is impossible. They can't be good at it. They weren't born with those skills. They're not going to be successful. It's too much work. It's too scary. However, I'm here to tell you that it's not impossible. It's actually a skill that can be learned and can be developed and can be mastered. And I'm an engineer myself, and when I started doing speaking and training, I could not speak effectively in public at all. And since that time that I started and worked on it, I've spoken for thousands of engineers all across the world. So I know from my own experience you can build this skill, and I'm going to give you some strategies today to do that. First of all, for those of you that haven't attended any of our past sessions, I'll give you a quick introduction of myself so you understand where I'm coming from and my perspective. I do have a bachelor's and master's in engineering, and I'm a licensed engineer. And I found success in my engineering career at a young age because I decided to develop many of the skills that I've been teaching and training on in this multi-level career development webinar series. Communication, building relationships, building expertise, public speaking. And after I developed those, my career took off, number one, but number two, my boss came to me and asked, Anthony, can you go around to our other offices and teach the other engineers and technical professionals these skill sets? And so I did. I was nervous about it at first, but I did it, and it went really well. And the company started seeing improved project performance. And it was at that point that I decided that I wanted to do that more regularly. So I decided to go to executive coaching school in the evenings, Toastmasters as well, which I'll tell you about later. It's a nonprofit to help you improve your speaking skills. And after doing it for a year and helping a lot of engineers in my own company there, I decided to go out on my own in 2009, start the coaching and training business, and I've traveled around the world since. We've developed podcasts for engineers and training for engineers, and that led me to the relationship with ASME and got me here today. So I want you to understand that I am an engineer and I've gone through an engineering career, and I try to create this content in ways that can relate to you as an engineer as well. The purpose and learning objectives for today's session to help you build authority and improve your confidence and effectiveness as a presenter. In this session, we will cover how to build expertise, leveraging LinkedIn to build authority, why public speaking matters, characteristics of an effective public speaker, 10 actions to help prepare for your presentation, 4 components of successful presentation delivery. So we're going to get into thinking about it beforehand, prepping, delivering, and then the follow-up. Again, I'm trying to give you a framework. And if you're wondering, you will be able to access this recording and the slides. We're sending out an evaluation afterwards. And in the evaluation, which you should receive by the end of this session in your email inbox, you can indicate if you'd like the slides and the recording. So, firstly, credibility and expertise is something that is really important in what we do as engineers, right? True expertise is the most potent form of authority. You see the quote there. In a technical profession, credentials matter, right? Publications might matter. Your level of expertise matters. And it can really help you and your organization to grow. So the question is, how do you build expertise? From my experience, the best way to build expertise is to become an expert on a very specific technical topic. So the example that I can give you from my own career, and I'm just going to give you a couple of stories here on my own career to kind of cement it home for you and see how you can relate them to whatever specific discipline you're in, because I know we have a lot of different mechanical engineering disciplines. I worked for a civil engineering firm where at the time a lot of farms were selling off their properties to develop homes. And in these areas, there was no municipal sewer service, so they had to use septic systems. And so I became an expert in the septic system design. And in the area where we worked, the land was very steep slopes. There wasn't a lot of flat land. And for septic systems, you need a certain area of flat land. So the less flat land, the less homes you can have. And, our clients aren't happy about that. So a new septic system was developed. This had nothing to do with us. It was just a new septic system was developed that needed less flat area to be effective. However, at the time, that new system was not approved in the areas where we were doing work in the specific county. So I decided kind of on my own to do a research paper with the support of my company and try to prove to the county we worked on that this new system was a good system and you should allow us to use it in this county. And so I did that, and I was able to get it approved on a case-by-case basis. And what that did for us was, number one, it made me look really good for my firm, and it made our firm look really good to our clients, because now we were doing something that was innovative. We were trying to help them to maximize their land. I also became an expert in my firm, so I had people in other disciplines and other locations just within my firm reaching out to me for questions on septic systems. So think about in your specific field, what is a specific technical topic that you can become an expert in? Some of the other things I did was I got my hands on any kind of publications in the industry for me, podcast publications. And so whatever discipline you're in, you can find those publications. Another story related to my career is I spent some time out in the field as a civil engineer when I was younger. And what that allowed me to do is when I got into the office as a designer, I knew how projects were put together, which made me more effective and gave me that expertise because I had a practical side of it. And again, we have people on this call that are in different fields, so I can't tell you exactly what a field project might look like, or field experience, or maybe manufacturing experience, or experience on the floor. But find that experience, because that's going to help you to develop and hone that expertise. Now, once you become an expert, there are two primary ways that you can share your expertise with others. You can write about it, articles, publications, papers, social media, or you can get out there and speak on the topic. So let's look at some venues that can be done. LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great venue for putting your expertise out there in the form of written articles, written posts. And I'm going to go through that in a minute on the next few slides. In terms of speaking, you want to focus on conferences and live events. And we'll also get into that in a minute in terms of the specific conferences and events. But let's talk about LinkedIn a little bit. So at EMI, our focus is our focus is management training for engineers, but I focus on writing articles on that specific topic. So if you look at my article, the Engineering Management Skills Trilogy plus the Theory of Constraints equals Effective Engineering Managers. I've got an image at the top, and I've got an article. If someone reads that article, one of our potential clients, they might say, wow, I like what Anthony's talking about here. I'd love to apply some of these things with our staff. I'm building an expertise around engineering management and leadership, which lends itself to our products and services. LinkedIn makes it very easy to write articles with nice photos, headlines, catchy things that can be then shared with people, and you can get the statistics as well. There are other opportunities, whether it's ASME or other organizations or other outlets. Again, here's one that I was asked to do by the Civil Engineering Association about going from engineer to manager. And again, that's what we help people do. So it's a perfect video, a perfect topic for me and they're pumping it out to many, many, many members, building my expertise. So the question I have for you is, why does public speaking matter? And again, we have people in different disciplines here. So how might public speaking help you in your specific career? I'd love to hear how some of the participants here will use or can utilize public speaking. Okay, Katie says communicate project milestones and issues. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, public speaking can be used in many ways related to projects. Whether it's an issue, a milestone, you might have to present your project to a client or to leadership or to stakeholders. Another way that public speaking that's important is because you may need to influence somebody. Maybe someone trying to get a new job, might be someone trying to seek funding, might be you trying to convince your boss why you need to hire another person for your team. Public speaking is helpful in persuasion when you need persuasion. So now, let's start by taking a big picture look at public speaking, and I want to walk through some characteristics that I typically see in effective public speakers. The first one is you're able to communicate. One thing that I want you to think about in terms of public speaking is it's a form of communication. Sometimes when we think of public speaking, we immediately think, oh my gosh, I'm going up on stage in front of 1,000 people. I can't do that. But public speaking could also be you in a room with your two supervisors in an annual performance review, and you have to get your thoughts out clearly and present them clearly. That's public speaking. It's communicating. Never forget that it's communicating. If you can communicate, you can speak. You must understand your goal as a speaker. Is your goal to get the audience to do X, Y, Z? Is your goal to seek funding? Is your goal to try to get yourself a raise? If you're not clear on what your goal is in speaking, then you're not going to achieve that goal. And think about your goal whenever you have a presentation, as opposed to just putting together a slide deck. And we're going to go through all this in more detail in the preparation part. You must be attuned to your audience. Many speakers that I know show up to an event just focused on their topic, their slides, and their delivery, and they completely forget the people that they're presenting to. What the makeup of the room is, how the way you say things or the way you build your slides is going to affect those people. It may mean all the difference whether or not you achieve that goal. You tell stories. Effective speakers can tell stories. I mean, think about this. If you have kids or if you've ever worked with kids in any capacity, if you tell them to do something, the odds of that happening are low. If you tell them a story around whatever you'd like to achieve, they're listening. They start to listen. They're engaged. Same thing happens with adults in a talk. So some of the tips here on the screen, the 5 C's of storytelling, can help you in terms of telling stories. There should be characters, conflict, climax, change, conversations. Again, if you inject some of these items into stories in your talks, you will better engage the audience. So for me, for example, in a lot of my talks, I will put stories in there about my engineering career because it relates to the content. So I'm not just giving people strategies and bullets the whole time. I'm also giving some stories. A question here. Does conversations mean back and forth discussions with your audience? Yes, conversations mean if you can ask questions of the audience from time to time and engage them in some conversations throughout your talk, that will be very helpful to you in terms of keeping engagement high. Good question, Katie. Use visuals that connect and communicate. You've heard the saying, I'm sure, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Sometimes people just need to see one image or one plan or one spec or one detail, one map, and they get everything, as opposed to you trying to explain it in 5 slides with text and hand gestures and everything else. Good speakers use visuals that help to drive their message home. Use your sense of humor. This can lighten up the audience, get them to be more engaged. Now, I know what your question is. What if I don't have a sense of humor? That's okay. Put something into your presentation that's funny. Something you find online, like a Dilbert. Something to just get the audience kind of relaxed and engaged with you. Pace yourself. Effective public speakers pace themselves. This is important because when I started speaking and I wasn't a good speaker at all, I went so fast that you couldn't even understand what I was saying. And I don't want that to happen to you because your pace is so important. You want to go, you don't want to be too fast that they can't digest the information and grab onto it, but you also don't want to go too slow that they become bored. So think about that. Lastly, just overall, as a public speaker, if you want to be effective, you should always ask yourself if you communicated after the presentation. Did you achieve your goal? Did you get people the information I wanted to get to them, and reflect on it? Any questions, thoughts so far? We're going to jump next into preparation of your actual presentation, the slide deck and such, but first I want to just pause here for 30 seconds and see if there's any thoughts yet. All right, let's keep rolling here. Now, we talked a little bit big picture about what it takes to be an effective speaker. Now you're into it. You have a talk coming up. So now you need to prepare, plan your slide deck. Let's go through 10 actions you can follow to do this. And remember, you can get this recording and you can go through these as well as you're planning it. Number 1, know your audience. Now, I know I mentioned this one earlier as a big picture item, but now I'm talking about from a more detailed standpoint. Can you find out the demographics of your audience? Can you find out from the venue how many people will be there? Can you find out older, younger, experience levels, male, female? Anything that you can get, any data that you can get to help you design the presentation in a way that this audience can best relate to it is helpful for you. As deep as you can go on this, because the more information you get around this, the more successful you'll be in your presentation. Number 2, finding venues to speak. What are some good venues? I'll ask you this. What are some good venues that you can speak at based on your situation that might be helpful for you? For example, professional associations, yes. Organizations where, depending on what you do, if you're in the private, public sector, but people you want to be in front of, whether it's prospective clients, stakeholders, funding, find those people and get in front of them. And we'll talk about approaching them in a minute. You have to decide on a good topic. If there's something going on in your field, whether it's a new material, a new device, a new process technique, or whatever the case may be, and it's something that's a trending topic, those are the kind of topics that you want to speak on because people are interested and people will show up. And it will also make it easier for you to get into a venue or into a conference that only takes a limited number of speakers if you have a good topic. And giving you an example going back to my career, when I did do land development on a lot of these farm properties that were being sold off, one of the biggest obstacles to construction on these properties was environmental issues like wetlands and certain plants and animal species that were close to extinction. So what we would do as a firm is we would always stay up to date on the latest environmental regulations and we would present on that. This way, our prospective clients who we knew were concerned about environmental guidelines would come to our talks. And it positioned us as an expert on those topics that they need help with. Now, here's something you have to think about. You might say, oh, I know a great conference, an ASME conference, I'm going to apply to speak there. Well, here's the problem. A lot of people apply, and not that many get selected. So how can you increase your odds of getting selected? One way is to approach the right person. If you can figure out who's on the speaker selection committee, you can go directly for them and ask them for input or feedback on your topic. I recently did this. I wanted to speak at a large engineering conference in Florida. I had been rejected a few years in the past because there just isn't a lot of spots for a lot of people. And so this time I reached out to a friend in Florida and asked him if he knew anybody on the committee, and he actually did. And he recommended I reach out to a woman from the committee. I reached out to her. I said, this is the topic I'm interested in presenting. Do you think I should submit? Would your committee find it interesting? And she responded to me and said, I think our committee would really like this topic. Please submit. And so I went ahead and submitted, and I was selected. If you find the right person, you can send them an email with a couple of pieces of information. Some people might classify this as a query letter. You want to put the topic that you want to speak on, a short description of the topic, and a couple of sentences about what makes you qualified to speak on that topic. And make sure that you're making it clear to the meeting planner about the high value that this topic will present to their audience and the interest people will have because it's a trending topic. That should help you increase the odds of getting selected to speak. Now it's time to get into the presentation development. And one of the first things that you want to do is identify your key takeaways. So if you go to a conference and you're speaking, what would you like your audience to do when you're done speaking? What is the takeaway? Would you like them to walk out of there with information? Are you trying to inspire them? Are you trying to get them to hire you or your company? What is your takeaway? You need to start with the end in mind so you can build your presentation accordingly. Maybe you volunteered to speak at a school on how to build an engineering resume. And your takeaway is that you want them to take away a template that they can use to model their resume after. Or you want to give them a 5-step process for building a great resume. Identify the key takeaways that you want to happen at the end and then build a presentation in a way to get it to them. Always prepare an introduction for yourself. I've been to a lot of conferences where I'm expecting to be introduced, and either I don't get introduced or someone gets up there and introduces me incorrectly. It's not good because when people listen to the introduction, they're listening and they're getting excited about your talk. They're deciding how much of an expert you are and how much they're going to pay attention to you. And so you should prepare a simple paragraph kind of summarizing what they're about to hear and some of your expertise. I also put a slide into the beginning of my presentation so I can run through some introduction on myself as well in case there isn't a good enough introduction or isn't one at all. just some of the key points of my background and how I intend to provide value to the audience. Prepare your opening and closing. These are usually the two most important parts of your talk, usually the two parts that the audience remembers. Typically, with your opening, you want to grab everyone's attention so that they're into you from the beginning. They're listening intently. They're connected. They're engaged. And then in your closing, you typically want to close with some kind of either a bold statement or a call to action to get them to do something, or tying back to what your goals were for the session. And when we get into the delivery in a few minutes, I'll give you some examples. You must prepare the right visuals. I mentioned this earlier, but let's talk a little bit about specifics on your slides. Do not put paragraphs of text on your slides. No one will read it. And if they do read it, that means they're not listening to you because they're reading text. I recommend roughly 4 bullets on a slide, maybe 6 words per bullet max. And if you're going to use images, steer clear of using clip art of any kind. Go with a high definition or high resolution photo. In terms of animations, what you should mainly use is the, appear one. When you click it, the text appears. It's clean, it's simple. Other than that, overbuilt animations are generally just showy and they can mess up the presentation. I don't recommend them. They're confusing. But remember, the visuals are important. We talked about this earlier. You can put something on a screen that they can see something and say, I totally get your entire presentation by that sketch or by that image or by that drawing. You can also use props. If you're designing a gear of some sort and you need to show it to a manufacturer or a client in a presentation, hand it to them. We used to do this in civil engineering when we had porous pavers. We'd bring a paver in and we'd show the board that was looking to approve the project. This is what it's going to look like. One prop, one picture can change the game. Practice. This is something that most speakers don't do. You must practice and know your content inside and out before your talk. And I don't mean practicing in front of a mirror. I mean practicing in front of a person, whether it's a colleague, a spouse. Go into your conference room with 1 or 2 people at lunchtime and ask them if they'll watch a few slides. Because when you get up on stage, you may feel pressure, right? This is the big deal, the real thing, the big show. And if you can't try to duplicate that same surrounding to some degree, the practice won't be helpful. So as often as possible, try to put yourself in that spot. Lastly, in this section, you can get very inexpensive microphones on Amazon or somewhere else, and you can record your talk and then listen back to it. Nobody likes to listen to themselves, I know that, but if you want to become an effective speaker, listening to yourself and making adjustments can be a very big part of that. Any questions on any of those items in terms of preparing your talk or other points I didn't mention that you might want to ask about? All right, let's keep going. Let's get into delivering your presentation. I'm going to give you a few actions you can take and then some additional hints and tips. First of all, you get up there on stage, just be you. You develop this technical expertise, you write these publications, you learn so much about it, you know your stuff cold, and then you get up there and you're trying to be someone that you're not, and you falter. Trying to become a super expert, trying to become a professional speaker, which you're probably not yet. Just be yourself and deliver the content. You don't want to overdo it and then come off as either sloppy or unprepared when you really know the content. Number two, there's an acronym, SOFTEN, that you can think about when you're speaking, which will help you remember to smile at the audience, be open, keep your chest open, be forward in terms of what you say and how you project to people, stand tall, make eye contact, and nod where it makes sense. If someone asks you a question, by nodding to them, you can let them know that you're engaged, you understand the question, and you're listening. This acronym was adapted from Making Contact, a book by Arthur Wasmer. SOFTEN, something you can easily remember. The next one, move with purpose. Sometimes moving around the room, around the venue, can help to keep people engaged because they see you moving and then they're moving their head and they're staying into it. They're following you. You're keeping that energy up. So you can move with purpose to keep people engaged. Deliver a memorable ending. I mentioned this a little bit earlier talking about the ending, but basically what you want to do with the ending is there's a couple things you can do. You can answer a question that you posed at the beginning of your talk, potentially. You can reinforce some of the key takeaways of the session. You could challenge your audience to take an action. The ending should be what they remember when they walk away from your talk. So think about what that might be to be super effective. Some other quick tips. How do I overcome nervousness is a question I get all the time. All the time. A couple things you can do to overcome nervousness. First of all, contrary to what I said earlier in terms of moving with purpose, don't move at all. Stay behind the podium. It's okay to use the podium a little bit as a crutch in the beginning to get comfortable. You should never use your slides as a crutch, however. You don't want to just read your slides. They should be there to guide you as a guide, as a baseline. But you certainly can stay put behind the podium if it makes you feel better or less nervous. Another one is if you're about to talk on stage and you're really nervous, take deep breaths. We call them square breaths, deep square breaths. You breathe in really deeply and exhale. That often can calm your nerves. The other way to overcome nervousness is to prepare for your content. If you're over prepared, you'll feel comfortable that you know the content. And that's important. As I said before, you want to keep that energy up. Keep your audience engaged, whether it's telling stories, moving around, keeping the pace to a good pace to keep that energy up. You're kind of controlling that energy flow of the room. Always hydrate before and during your talks. Just a note here, coffee is not hydrating you. It actually can dehydrate you. Drink water. Think of all of the possible problems that can arise at a talk, because so many things can happen. And I'll give you a story from my own career. A couple of years ago, I went down to the University of Memphis, and I was speaking for all the engineering students, 300-400 people in a cafeteria. And I get up there, and I start talking. Maybe 5 minutes in, the projector completely dies, and they can't get it back on again. Luckily, I had given the talk several times that week already, and I had some handouts with me that the audience was able to use to follow along, and I was able to do it, um, just do it and do it well, and we got good reviews. I happen to be lucky in that case, but you need to prepare for everything. You might plug into someone's projector and it doesn't mesh with your computer. The light bulb could go out. There could be anything can happen. Plan for the worst possible thing that can happen and be prepared for it. Some other mistakes to avoid: jokes. I did say to inject some humor. However, you need to be careful that these aren't religious or politically sensitive jokes. You don't know what people's preferences are. That could come back to haunt you. The other one that a lot of people do that's not good is they show up with right before the talk. They give themselves no preparation time, no time to set up. That's also something that you want to really avoid because that can really hurt you. Lastly, following up after your presentation. Usually, depending on whatever your presentation is for, you should follow up accordingly. So if you're a member of ASME and you have a local meeting and you're looking for some committee members to get on the board with you, then and you do a presentation at one of the ASME meetings and there are people that are expressing interest in joining, you can follow up with them. That's your responsibility to figure out who you need to follow up with from your presentation. Remember, it goes back to your goal. Of course, you also want to have a Q&A session at the end of all of your talks. That gives people a way to ask you questions about the content and try to tie it back to themselves. And that's the best form of learning. Learning something and practicing it on the job. And if someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, the most important thing that you need to remember or you should do is to say, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact answer for that and I don't want to get it wrong, so let me double check everything and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Be honest. If you just start spitting out wrong answers, that is not going to help you in the long term. I'm going to open it up for questions now, and while I do that, I have two things for you. One, a question that I often get is, how many slides should my presentation be? There's no answer for that. The answer is, well, there's no numerical answer for that. The answer is as many as you need it to be to achieve your goal. So if you had a goal of informing someone about something and it takes you 2 slides, it takes you 2 slides. It takes you 60 slides, it takes you 60 slides. If you have a time limit of, let's say, an hour, then you need to think about, you can use the slide delivery time as a rough estimate. So if you know that it typically takes you a minute per slide or a minute and a half, you're going to be 45 to 60 slides. But again, that's just a ballpark estimate tool. Anyone have any questions at all? The link you see on the screen, go.asme.org/career-webinars, will bring you to all of our webinars, including the next one, which will be an open Q&A session that you can ask questions on any career-related questions, not just what we've covered in the webinars. Any questions at all? Okay, question here. How do you deal with a combative audience? That's a good question. And actually, I just spoke about this recently. Here's something to think about in terms of dealing with people. People are like magnets. So if you deal with someone and you're angry at them and you yell at them, they're going to do the same thing back. That's the assumption you should make. But if you can break that habit, if someone yells at you and they're angry or they say, oh, you're a terrible speaker, instead of going back and yelling at them, you could say, you know what, I do have some weaknesses I'm trying to improve, but thank you for the feedback. I hope to use it to my advantage in the future. So think about that and being a magnet. Something I often tell my kids, people are going to react the way you react. Try to remember that. Here's another one. Can you talk about the dress code during public speaking? Yeah, that's a good question. The dress code is not just necessarily wearing a suit and tie. The dress code should be to kind of dress, I don't want to say like the audience, but what I was once told is that you never want to be dressed, underdressed than anyone in the audience. So if one person's going to wear a tie, you should be wearing a tie. But if you're going to a college to speak, you're not going to show up in a suit and tie. They won't be able to relate to you as much. Or if I'm in my job when I was a civil engineer and I would go to a community, if it was a farming community, and I showed up with a suit and tie, they might be like, where's this guy coming from? And they might not relate with me. So great question. Think about your goal. Think about the people you're communicating with and how you should dress that would allow you to best engage with them. For example, I went to Alaska once and I did a bunch of talks. I loved Alaska. It's beautiful. But when I was up there, I came with a tie, and someone in the talk told me no one in Alaska wears ties. So I took it off. Good question. Anybody else have a question before we wrap up for today? Remember, we're going to send an evaluation out to you in the next 15 minutes. Please give me your honest feedback and indicate if you'd like a copy of the slides and recording. And you can go to go.asme.org/career-webinars. And there you can register for the next session, which will be Q&A on any of the topics we talked about or beyond, about your career planning, professional development, your future goals. We just have a really good conversation around development. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time today. I look forward to seeing you on the next joint webinar with ASME as part of our multi-level career development series. Thank you.